coming on today. And I wanted to start with the origins of each doc. Ryan, I wanted to start with you. What I read was that, well, let me just give a rundown of the film if you haven't seen it. Come See Me in the Good Light profiles the spoken word poet Andrea Gibson, who died on July 14th of this year. Ryan followed her and her wife Megan Fowley as they navigate the challenging territory of life and death. What I read was that you went to Tig Notoria and asked her for a funny film to do. You wanted funny ideas. And then she said, oh, this, a cancer film. How did that happen?
Yeah, whatever log line you just read sounds very sad.
Yeah.
Is it not working? Hello? Check. Hello?
If you turn it on.
If you turn the little thing.
Can you hear me now? Yes. Yeah, that log line that Addie read sounded like a must-miss film. Yeah, I go way back with Tig Notara. I've known Tig for a long time, and we've been always saying to Tig, like, bring us a funny documentary. Why aren't documentaries funnier? And so we've been waiting for her to finally pitch us a comedy. And so when she called a couple years ago and said, like, I have this non-binary poet friend who's nearing end of life with ovarian cancer, it sounded like the opposite of a funny documentary. But we love Tig, and of course we trust her sense of humor, and Tig said to us, like, just trust me, this is one of the funniest people I've ever known in my life. And I knew nothing about spoken word poetry. Now I know a lot, but I also wasn't a huge fan at the time. But Tig said, like, this is the rock star of spoken word poetry. So Tig sent us a couple links to Andrea performances, which kind of blew me away. They're, they are spoken word, but they're this medium of art that I feel like I had never seen before. It's like poetry meets stand-up, meets storytelling and music as well. So we were blown away by Andrea's art form, but then we listened to some interviews with Andrea, and this is someone who had spent much of their life severely depressed and even suicidal, and once they got their terminal diagnosis, everything shifted for them, the way they saw life and their relationship with their wife. And so they were confronting end of life in a pretty remarkable way. And so we said to Tig, like, if Andrea and Megan want to meet us, we'll get on a plane. And so 1 week later, we were in their driveway in Colorado, and that's how it all began.
Wow. Is this microphone working? Okay, everyone can hear me. Okay, Ben, with your film, it's a portrait of your parents, Jerry Stiller and Ann MEARA, and it's a portrait of their life together and their marriage. I'm wondering why you decided, like, now at this point in your career, after doing everything you've done, working across several mediums, why you wanted to make a feature doc.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it was when my dad passed away in 2020, I knew it was, obviously it was COVID. The first, and my parents' apartment, they left it to my sister who was going to sell it. And so I knew this apartment where I'd grown up was going to go away, and I knew that I couldn't do a memorial. We couldn't do a memorial for my dad, so that was the instinct. Was like, oh, and I knew there was all this stuff that my dad saved, all these recordings, audio recordings. Which I learned a lot more than I thought. Home movies, videos, scripts. He just saved everything, and I was just trying to think of a way. I had this instinct to want to do something that somehow was about my parents. But of course, even when you say out loud, like, oh, just do a tribute to my parents, it sounds like, well, okay, you could just kind of do that for friends and family. But as I just knew there was something in there about their lives and their creativity and what they had done that had, I guess maybe instinctually it had affected me in my life. But it took a while to realize that as I made the movie, that it ended up becoming more about the creative process, and actually, since my parents were married and worked together for 60 years plus, about how two people in a relationship could, how they prioritized their relationship over the work sometimes, but the work was also very important to them. And as it evolved, I realized it was kind of about our whole family. And for me, kind of growing up in that world with them and having kids also myself who want to who are, going into the creative world. So that's how it evolved, but it was sort of an instinct at the beginning just to do something with all the stuff that my parents had. And then I kind of learned about what would become as I was making it.
Okay, I'm moving on to Sam. Your short, Saving Superman, chronicles Jonathan, a 57-year-old man with autism. From what I read, this was it's a personal film. You knew Jonathan through, I think, your aunt. Can you explain how it came about?
Yeah, so my co-collaborator, Adam Macmahon, his aunt Julie was the protagonist in the film, and so she was, kind of best friend, quasi-caretaker, if you will, to Jonathan for the last 20, 30 years or so. Adam and I had been aware of the story for probably, since we were in high school, he was in his teens, I was in my teens, and so, he's 29, I'm 31, so it kind of just came to a moment where we were ready to tell the story finally. I think if we had done it any other time, it may not have been, turned out the way it is now, but yeah, we just had always talked about it, and things just kind of fell into place, and just having the relationship with Adam's aunt and just building that trust, because it was very sensitive, especially with Jonathan's mother, who also is a protagonist. She's 90, 91, battling cancer, who's in the film, also a protagonist. So just dealing with the delicate nature of the story and the characters, it just took a lot of time. And when you do docs, everybody can talk about this, the nature of embedding and really building that relationship. I think inherently we already had it just because it was his aunt, and we just got really fortunate with that. But I've built projects where you have to build that for years, and you don't even pick up a camera, which I guess led up to that moment. But yeah, I mean, just through we got really lucky, just Adam's aunt Julie.
So Bernard and Allison, Becoming Led Zeppelin is the first ever authorized documentary about the band. How did you make that happen? I mean, I can't imagine how many hoops you had to jump through.
We had to jump through a lot of hoops and travel a lot of air miles back and forward from LA to London to Scotland to Birmingham, all over the place to meet them. We were off the back of a film we made with Robert Redford called American Epic, about the deep roots of American music that some people called the first time America heard itself. And we'd researched 100 artists for that series of films, and we were looking for a follow-up to that, and the next period of time on from that was going to be the late 60s, when Led Zeppelin came. We're riding the crest of that wave, so, and their story had never been told before, so that's why we chose to focus on them.
Yeah, American Epic was all these blues and country acts from the 20s that many of them no one had ever seen a photograph of before we made the film. But their songs had been covered by Bob Dylan and Johnny Cash and people like this, and so we wanted to film that music coming back from the rest of the world back to America. So we chose Zeppelin because they'd never agreed to do a film. So we actually were looking for something more than authorised. We actually wanted a film which they weren't editorialising the film at all, so we wanted total artistic control. So we had to script the film in minute detail and plan everything for almost a year, and then we got to meet them, and luckily Fortune smiled and they'd actually watched American Epic and they were into it. So it's really just a lesson out to any other filmmakers out there. It's all about preparation. You can't make yourself prettier or taller, maybe a little bit, but you can be prepared.
When you say you scripted it, you wrote the whole thing out and then you presented it to them?
Yeah, so we scripted, we kind of got the fragments. They've virtually never talked to press, certainly never candidly, so we had to improvise what we thought they would say, and we did 175 background interviews with people that knew them, but we just wanted them telling the story. But it was informed by talking with everyone they grew up with, all the musicians they played with, and all that business. And then the main thing was to have so much stuff that they'd never seen before when we filmed it, that they were shocked into forgetting why they were doing the film, and they were just like in the moment when they were 14 seeing this for the first time. So it was constantly showing things they hadn't seen for 50 or 60 years.
Okay. Well, I think it came up that, you know, it takes a long time for most documentaries to gain the trust of your subjects, to make them feel comfortable. And Ryan, what I heard was that this was not the case in your film. I heard that you met her, you met Andrea, and then in 5 minutes you were shooting that dinner sequence. Is that right?
Yeah, there's a scene in my film, if you see it, again, it's not your typical cancer documentary. We call it a romantic comedy. It's a love story, and hopefully it's very funny. And there's a scene very early in my film of a dinner scene amongst 3 people where they're talking about cancer, but it very quickly turns to fingering and then thumbing the sexual act. So it's a very explicit conversation, and it's a very funny one. And that was literally the first day that I met Andrea and Megan. And this is my 14th documentary. So I've spent like the last 23 years making films, and that's a big part of my job. All of our jobs, I would say, probably is winning that trust over. And many times that takes months, if not years, to chisel away at that. Understandably, I think that's a really enjoyable part of our job. But Andrea and Megan, for whatever reason, I think Tig had been a lifelong friend of Andrea's, and I think that really helped that Tig had sort of sanctioned us as filmmakers. But whenever we walked into that house for the first time, they were cracked open in a way that I've never seen before in documentary subjects. And at the beginning, we knew about Andrea as this rock star of poetry. We knew nothing about Megan, who becomes a huge part of the film. So at the beginning, we were like, oh my God, we're making a documentary about a poet, and the poet is married to another poet? Like, how are these gonna be 2 interesting characters that carry a film? And Megan, for whatever reason, was just as cracked open as Andrea. I think part of that is they're spoken word artists, so they've spent a lot of their careers sort of wearing their hearts on their sleeves and exposing their trauma on stage. But I also think a huge part of it was Andrea was dying. By the time we began this film, there was the question, they may only survive for a few more weeks. They ended up living for a year, which is how long we documented, over a year, which is how long we documented that relationship. And I think because Andrea was actively dying, there was a sense of leaping off the cliff when it came to making a documentary, that it didn't come with all of the normal strings that usually come with documentary subjects, which, by the way, are totally understandable. That question of how is this going to be used, or winning of trust, or vanity in every way, vanity physically but also emotionally when someone's bearing their soul in a documentary. Andrea was just so vulnerable from the moment we started rolling. And so for me, they were a total dream, like a unicorn documentary subject in that way, because we didn't have time, because there was this ticking clock of cancer. It allowed us to abandon that many months or years process that you're often chiseling away to get that trust.
Ben, I wanted to ask you about, making this documentary. It's very personal, not just about your parents, but you go into your marriage, your kids are part of it. Was there any hesitation being a public figure and making a doc about yourself and exposing that side?
Yeah, I was going to say also, I didn't have to gain the trust of my subjects, because I just waited till they died. Because all I think about all the time was making this movie is about my parents, what they would think about it. And I think, if I'm being honest, I was probably not that it was in the forefront of my mind when my dad was still alive, but of doing it while they were still around. And that was just is actually, for me, was something that was like a big issue making the movie. That the thoughts of my parents, how they would feel about it, and figuring out what I felt was the right amount to tell in terms of personal stuff. But then also, I think in my own life with my kids and my wife, the evolution of my marriage and where it was, which was not in a great place when we started, when I started working on the movie to when I finished, where my wife and I not been together, then we got back together, but separated. So that actually really affected the story of the movie for me, and being able to talk to her about our relationship and then talk to my kids about it too. So the fact that we had gotten to this place, which I realized was in my making the movie, was kind of connected, I think, to my experience with my parents, and how I think that was modeled for me, which is kind of subconsciously in terms of how they approached their marriage and looking at my own. That you know, these were all questions during the making of the movie: how much to reveal, how much to, you know, and for so long it was just something that I was making, you know, privately, that I would show to, you know, friends or friends of friends to get feedback on. That moment of like, okay, this is going to be what it is, checking in with everybody close to me that they were okay to put this out in the world was important. But it is kind of surreal because I have never made a doc or a doc. I love documentaries. I find them to be to me, are the most emotionally affecting movies. You know, to be able to make something that was hopefully honest, but then also to put it out there in the world. I was pretty clear by the time we put it out that, okay, I felt like the movie was speaking to something that hopefully would connect with people on a personal level about their own relationships and families. And that's, for me, was part of the justification or rationalization for me in being able to say, okay, it's okay to talk about this personal stuff.
Yeah, just one follow-up to that. I mean, you go a little bit into your mother and her drinking. I wondered if that was a debate during the edit, like, are we gonna do this, or are we not gonna do this?
Yeah, no, 100%, yeah, because my mom was an alcoholic, but then she got sober at the end of her life, and the reason I felt that it was appropriate to put it in the films, because I knew that she had been very open about it, and I felt in the telling of the story, you know, that arc of what she got to in her life was really important, and was a part of our family story. And the person I thought about more was my father, and how he would be about me talking about that, because he was always very protective of my mom, and but also was the person who had actually made all these recordings and saved all this stuff, and I think very much would have liked to have seen something made out of all this material, and a story told. So that's the one I wrestle with more, and I don't know, but I hope he would be okay with it. But the other part of it was then in like trying to tell the story of their whole relationship over 60 years, how much of that stuff to include, you know, more quote unquote sensational stuff, or things, you know, that are, you know, people would, you know, I know as an audience be like, oh wow, that's something I didn't know, and showing something that's very personal in her life. Just getting the right balance of that in the movie that I hoped would really give people a sense of what the overall feeling of their relationship was, you know, from my point of view, that was just one part of it, and I didn't want it to overwhelm the story.
Okay, and I want to move on and talk about Sam and Allison and Bernard. I mean, can you talk about gaining the trust of your subjects and what that was like?
I mean, in particular, with shorts, you know, you just kind of just go in, you feel it out, see if you can shoot as much as you can in a short amount of time. And I think I just had come off a feature that I shot 200 days over 5 years, so I really love embedding myself into these longitudinal type projects. So, like, thinking about shooting something and gaining the trust within like a couple hours or like a day was just like, man, I don't know if this is like in my wheelhouse. I really like building friends, because, you know, someone said this yesterday during the ceremony, Critics' Choice. It was like I think it was Heidi, she said, you know, it's like you live with them on after the project, like they just become part of you. So that's just like a huge component of, you know, what I look for when I take on projects. So like shorts, it's really not so much, that's kind of like the antithesis of that. So, you know, with this project, we shot 2 days in a row, and then we did a pickup day, and then just, you know, got to the edit. But I mean, as far as gaining the trust, you know, Julie had done a lot of the groundwork, just because she was, like I said, like kind of like this best friend, quasi caretaker, if you will. And so, like, when the story got viral, when all the news outlets had picked it up, I'm trying to think, like, Now This was one of the big ones, and it got so Jonathan kind of had a bit of exposure to media and press and the frenzy of cameras and everything, but there was like a very sentimental element to it, just because Adam is Julie's nephew, so like knowing that he could trust her, that he's not going to be exploited in any capacity. And just the sheer nature of knowing that, we're going to make this, we're doing it, in our own way, where it's incredibly grassroots, it's just us. It just kind of helped us basically just set us up for success. But I would say, traditionally, if it was like something where, I had more time, obviously, everyone has talked about this, where, you talk about the relationships, like, there won't be a time where I would go spend like weeks at a time just like playing, like, my debut feature, I followed 4 farm families for 5 years, so I would like play video games with these farmers like for a week on end, just to build the trust with them. And so just stuff like that, where you become friends with them, and it's also like give or take. Like, I tell them, I tell people that I shoot with, you kind of exchange, like trust. You tell them things that that you would tell your best friend or your family, and so you kind of like give or take a little bit, and you just try to be as genuine, as authentic as possible. And I think I always say this when I'm in these kind of opportunities. Like, I live in Indiana, the film was shot in Illinois, so I'm a diehard like Midwesterner, and I think that helps me to have that authenticity, if you will. So I take a lot of pride in that. I think that helps too.
I bet it does.
Well, I think the strongest trust where you put your life in other people's hands, like if you're mountaineering or something, or in the army, and there's this objective and you've got to go for it. So you're not looking at each other, you're looking at an objective. So with this film, it's not really a film about Led Zeppelin, it's actually a film about how you do things from when you're a child. How do you take something you're into when you're a child and walk that through your parents' objections, all these people trying to stop you from doing it, all these things thrown in your way, and how do you collaborate with people that you have nothing in common with. And so really the film is for like 10 years, 20 years, 100 years from now. It's like for kids to watch it, young girls, boys, goes, this is how you do stuff. Whatever it is you want to do, that's what the film's about. And Led Zeppelin just are some fantastic, they're a really excellent example of that at the beginning. The film only goes up to 1970 when they become the most successful group. It doesn't go into the period afterwards when it all becomes wild. It's like from childhood to this first success, just the first year of their career. And so when we presented it to them, we had everything worked out, didn't we?
Yeah, and talking about trust and how you get people on board, I think there's 2 words. It's preparation and perseverance. And so we knew that we would have one shot only with these people that never said yes to anybody before. So when we got our first meeting with Jimmy, we were really prepared, and that we flew to London, met in a hotel room, and that first meeting took 7 hours. And Bernard had
like 150-page storyboard.
Yeah, no
words, everything memorized, every date memorized.
And
it
was like an exam.
Yeah, so I'd go something like, oh, so this is the point where you go up to the Midlands to see this singer playing to 10 people, Robert Plant, and he's like...
And Jimmy said, what was the name of Robert's band when I first saw him?
I'd be Obstweedle.
Very good, carry on. and so it's like this for 7 hours. And
then at the end he goes, do you want it to be just about me then? And I'm like, no, it's about the whole band. He goes, well, I'll help you get it made. Like that. And off you go. And so he passed that, so we go on with it. And then the next thing you got that, the next thing is you're dealing with this entity where there's been a complete antipathy towards the media. Like they literally don't talk to the media. And so it's like, how do you get them to talk on camera like they talk to you privately when you've disarmed them with all this stuff? So when it came to filming them, we had to arrive with literally oceans of film footage and photographs and flyers from their childhood through to their first year in Zeppelin that they hadn't seen since that time. So when we were talking about musicians that inspired them, we'd find clips and show them on the screen that they'd never seen before. None of this is in the movie, actually. But it's just so they return to the way they thought when they were 14. So it's like directing an actor, I think. We are trying to induce this performance. And the performance is just think like you were when you were 14, now when you were 16. And that moment when they get to the final rehearsal, you know, they're like, oh, the wonder of meeting these people for the first time, whatever they may think of them now.
Yeah, it's like time travel, and like, for example, you do see the bath footage, and they're being taken back to the moment that they were, you know, there was good memories for them at the time. So we're showing things like the bath film footage, and you see Jimmy saying, oh, I didn't even know there was footage of it, and Robert's happy because he's remembering the first time that they met.
But the hardest thing is one of the band members has been dead since 1980, and he never did interviews. So Robert Plant was like, well, how are you going to have him in the film? So we had like a year-long search to find him talking, and we found buried in Australia this tape. We'd heard a fragment with like a few minutes on a bootleg with this Australian talking, and we thought, I could tell it was a radio interview, like with a quarter-inch reel. And we searched the whole of Australia and eventually found in the basement. We got them to look through thousands of unmarked reels, and this actually turned up. And that's him. So, and he was talking about all this stuff that none of the other band talked about.
Yeah.
You know?
And you can see them in the film when they're hearing, you know,
There's
the fallen comrade's voice for the first time.
Yes, they're hearing him for the first time in 40 years. So we just literally surprised them when they came in. We just started rolling the set. And the other thing we did, we didn't, these guys do amazing work, but we knew with this, we only had one shot to get that honest thing. So the interviews are up to 6 or 7 hours long and one take. So that you catch them in the moment, you zap them with all this stuff, bring them back to 14, 15, 16, then done. You know, no redos.
Wow. Well, that's incredible. I wanted to ask about, you know, a central tenet of making documentaries is that you end up with a film. You don't always end up with a film that you set out to make. I wanted to ask all of you, how did the filming and editing process change while you were putting together each of your stories? Go ahead.
I'll start. Yeah, the day I met Andrew, when I was saying we pulled up in the driveway, we had never spoken with Andrea, never talked to them or Megan, and Andrea came out. I just had a crew of 4 people the entire time we made this film, and it was the same 4 people because it was so intimate. We were with a couple while one of them was dying, you know, like literally in their bedroom in the shower with them. And the first thing Andrea said to me when they gave me a hug outside was, "Welcome to my home. I guess you're going to be with me when I die." And that was sort of the assumption all along in making my film. It was my assumption as the filmmaker. It was Tig's assumption, having brought us the idea. And between Andrea and Megan, there was this understanding that we were a documentary crew that was going to be there until the final breath. And I don't mean to spoil my film for people that haven't seen it, but the film does not end with Andrea's death. Andrea died in July, as Addie mentioned, but our film premiered at Sundance in January, and Andrea was there in the room with an audience when the film premiered. So something clearly, drastically changed in the making of the film, or at least the preconceived notion of what the film would be. And I think you know, I would argue some of the best documentaries of our time became completely different stories than what that director set out to make. So I think part of the fun of the job, at least to me, as someone who hates planning, is being nimble in the field and being willing to follow, being at the mercy of your story. And so I had an incredible editor who I've worked with on a bunch of films, and as she was cutting the footage, you know, Tig had told us how incredibly funny Andrea and Megan were, and as we started cutting the scenes, they were so full of joy, and this couple was so alive and hilarious that we started to shift our mindset that the film was not an end-of-life film. It wasn't about dying or Andrea teaching us how to die. It was Andrea teaching us how to live before we die. And so we ended the film with Andrea very alive, which was tricky because the understanding was that we would be there until her final breath, which we were, by the way, just without cameras. So I didn't want to tell Andrea, who was nearing the end of their life, that we were submitting to Sundance. All documentary filmmakers have been rejected from Sundance many times once you start reaching my age, so why would you want your subject, the last thing that they might know is that you submitted to Sundance and did not get in? So the best phone call of my entire life in my filmmaking career was November of last year, calling Andrea. It was mass confusion at the beginning because Andrea was saying, like, what are you talking about? Our documentary is almost finished, and you're saying if I survive for 6 more weeks that I can be there with an audience and see my love story on screen. And that's what ended up happening. So Andrea and Megan were there. It was incredible. It was that rock star that Meg talked about, like when you don't know at the end of my film, unless you're very, very familiar with Andrea, if they're alive or dead. And so no one at Sundance, especially in an industry screening of whatever, 600 people, knew. And so when the film ended and Andrea walked up to do their Q&A with the audience, it was like electric. So, but it was one of those things where you have to be at the mercy of the story. You have to let the story tell you what it's about and what your ending is, I think. And I think often that's having brilliant collaborators. In this case, my editor, Bernice Chavez, who kept saying, like, are we sure the hero has to die at the end of this film?
Wow, okay. Ben, did anything change while
I mean, as I said, both my parents were dead when I started. And that was, for me, the idea of making this movie was going to be about them. What really changed in the process of making it, I think, was realizing that I had to be a part of it. And I really resisted that for a long time. This concern about making it in some way about like me being part of it too much, even though so I kind of stayed out of it for a very long time. And about maybe like 3 years into the process, I showed it to a filmmaker friend of mine who basically said, like, I'm really engaged by the movie and the story, but I'm just seeing the back of your head a lot in the movie. I'm curious what is going on with you in this thing. And I think that was, for me, the biggest change that happened was when I kind of sort of like accepted it. Okay, I'm going to put myself into this story because I'm the person making this movie about my parents. So, that specific perspective is what the movie, is coming from. And I really did not foresee it becoming then about really this story about, I think, this generational story of how creativity and relationships and parenting are all kind of, how they're all, in our family, have all been connected and how they've been cyclical and the things that you pass down. And that was not originally what I thought the movie would be about, but as I said earlier, I didn't actually really know exactly what the movie was going to be about. The other thing I say, just as someone who's not made a documentary before, that having to live in that world of not knowing, for me, when I'm working on a movie or a television show, the development of the script is so important. That process, when you get to a point where you start filming, you have a finished script, and really it's totally different when you're making a doc. You're writing it as you go along and, in a certain way, and letting the events speak to you and tell you where to go, and having to trust that and live in that sort of uncertainty was something that I found, really challenging.
Yeah.
And I have to then say, for me, the collaborators that I had were just so brilliant. Adam Kernitz and Jeff Richmond, just brilliant documentary filmmakers, and especially being so close to the subject matter, that perspective, and Liz Moorheim, one of our producers, and John Lesher, our producing partner, that input was essential.
I have to ask, would you ever do another documentary?
I love documentaries. Yes, definitely. It's again having to embrace the process, which is now, I guess, having gone through it once, I think it might seem, I'm excited about it, because maybe not to have to do something that is like about my parents. But I think it's that thing of having to just
give into the process and trust that it's going to evolve and open itself up to you. But as I said, with you, yes. Sure.
I wanted to get in, I know we're running a little late on time, or don't have too much time, I don't think, but I want to talk about distribution for a second. It's pretty, I mean, I'm just going to say it how it is. It's really rough out there for distribution for most docs. I know you guys, with becoming Led Zeppelin, it was a hard thing to sell. You went through CAA, I think, and that didn't work out. And then can you talk about how you finally found distribution?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely nobody wanted our film at all. We were turned down by everybody. The people at Apple said, oh, there's not enough sex and drugs and groupies in it. And then the people at Amazon said, well, there's too much music.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to want to see full songs.
Yeah.
And
we wanted to play. Zeppelin has a principal influence is African American music, so we wanted to play full songs of the African American acts that inspired them. So you got 3 minutes of Sonny Boy Williams and Little Richard. So when Zeppelin appeared, you can hear what's in the stew, you know? Whereas normally just lip service, they play 10 seconds. And that's because the language of documentaries is about this. It's not about information, because archive and music is expensive and talk is cheap. And so it's much more expensive to show Little Richard and let the audience see what an influence he was than someone telling you this. And so, and the reality is that, you know, so they were objecting to that. They wanted all that cut, all the African American acts removed, and just get to Zeppelin straight away. And I was going, well, they wouldn't exist without them. You know what I mean? So then the next thing, it was all this stuff, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was really hard. And then I think we went to A24, and the people there, they just were too young. They just didn't get it. But so we were really at our wits' end. But we weren't going to change the film because we had a vision for the film from the very beginning. And what you see on the screen is literally what we started out with that script that we then went and ran through with Jimmy Page back in 2019, and we didn't change it at all.
And I should say I have like immense admiration for the documentary making here, where you're just in this subject with this person dying, and you have to make sense of it. Obviously, we're dealing with something that happened 50 years ago. So there isn't manoeuvring of what the truth is. Those are the events that happen. So all that matters is that you've talked to every living person and interviewed them that was there. And this is your best view. And so when you're interviewing these guys, you know what they're saying, whether it's true. And also, sometimes the most important something like, Jimmy made some little reference to his mother, but I knew from all his school friends, she was his principal motivator. And so what you found is, there were these incredibly important women in the story that drove the whole story. Their girlfriends, their wives, their mothers were very, very important. And these people are just never covered in documentaries, you know? Like, I mean, basically, there wouldn't be a film if there was Allison. I mean, basically, Allison's the driving force of it all. And it's generally the way is women do those things. The women, the only things that work in the world is stuff that women like. Men take ages to get their head around anything. We're kind of Neanderthal, you know?
And I just think the thing is it's like perseverance. This documentary making it so hard because you have to rely on the archives that you've got to tell the story, and it's perseverance. So just like making the film was like incredibly difficult, and kudos to our brilliant editor Jan Gitlin. There was so few fragments of footage about this group because they never filmed. Their manager, if he met somebody trying to film them in a concert, he would literally pull the film out the camera, smash the camera, and eject that person from the venue. So every fragment that you see in our film is like that is all that exists. So it was really hard to make. And then we had to persevere through the pandemic. We had to go to hiatus for a year, and then when nobody wanted to buy the film, it's like we really didn't know what to do.
So the last studio left was Sony Pictures Classics, and it's run by these two old dudes, you know, Tom Barker and Michael Barker and Tom Bernard. And they're like something out of this David Niven's autobiography that I read from the 30s, you know? They've never seen a PDF in their life, you know? And it's all, we're going to drop the trailer tomorrow. This is a good spot. And it's like, really? You know? But the thing they've got is no fear. They've got no fear. And fear is your enemy in film, you know, is your enemy. There's no fear. And these executives, they're terrified. Every decision is predicated on, will I lose my job talking with you? Then way down the line is, can I make a bonus? And at the bottom is the world a better place for this film coming up? And I think all of us here think the other way around.
Well, it is interesting because it's a music doc, and you know, right now it's music, true crime, you know, cults are selling, so that is surprising to hear. But Sam, I wanted to ask you, like with shorts, you know, those are so hard. I mean, they're almost impossible. Can you tell us about where people can see your short and how to access it?
Yeah, I saw something, to no fault of my own, I love reading reviews. I don't troll or respond or anything, I just really love reading and just kind of seeing what people think. And usually like 80% of the time I don't get demoralized, with the 20 I leave open just for any kind of feeling. But someone tweeted last night underneath the Critics' Choice announcement, it was, man, it's incredible how they packed 20 minutes of emotion, or what is it? They said it was criminal how much emotion they put in under 20 minutes. And so I think like that's always the biggest thing about like what, that's also the sweet spot with shorts too, because like you're trying to make it like 9 or 10 so it gets programmed into festivals. Cause it's like over 20, 25, it's like festivals completely like turn it down. So there's always like a sweet spot of like the length. And so that was always like the biggest thing about how long should this be. So I feel like it's always gonna be like 8 minutes or like 40. And so I'm like, man, is 11 gonna be like strong enough? Which is why last night, like I almost like threw up when we found out with lungs. I was like, this isn't right. Like there's no way this is real. So where it's available is we released it through kind of a startup, kind of like New Yorker type model called Switchboard Magazine. Really cool initiative. We're kind of like not the pilot, but it's in its inception, and this is like the first kind of go about. And so we've got 3 other shorts, and we announced it today. Brendan Fraser's attached his EP as well. He's a Hoosier too, which is cool. Yeah, so it's available for free on YouTube, no paywall, and yeah, just want to get it out as many views as possible. Visibility and just trying to tell a wholesome Midwestern story.
That's great. All right. Well, I just want to say Ryan and Ben's film are on Apple, right? Yeah. So they secured that.
Yeah, no, I was very fortunate. I think because, you know, I'm an actor, if you know my parents, I was very, very fortunate. It's so challenging. You know, I just thought about it when we were making the doc too. Every time that you decide, okay, you know, we have to do a shoot day and, you know, get whichever interview or whatever it is, you have to think so hard about, you know, the best way to use your resources, because it's so tough. And I was just thinking about what you guys have gone through on this. I mean, I wanted to ask you a million questions I want to ask you, but just how you persevered to make this film without, I mean, the funding, all the things you have to do on your own for so long. I started my doc on my own. You know, I was able to self-fund for as long as I needed to, and you know, I was lucky to be able to do that. But it's so challenging to just make these things.
It's so hard. It's so hard.
Yeah, because the whole business of film financing is basically people promising you a certain amount of money and then seeing if they don't have to give it to you. And it doesn't matter what the subject is, you know. But yeah, I mean, I think the most important thing for us is, I would say with this is that I would like to see shorts before the main feature when I go into the cinema. Yeah. And the second thing is the cinema itself. You know, that's what these people, they want to take this away. And so, you know, all our goal was, I never thought about money or anything. It was just, I imagined it at my local cinema when I grew up at Brixton Ritzy. And it was like, I want something that they can play twice a year in there, like the things I saw, like Rocky Horror, The Harder They Come. I want to make one of those films, like a musical with archive. And it was, you know.
And we actually have to give props to IMAX, because they took a real chance in our film and they gave it a whole week exclusive across the whole country, from Alaska to Alabama. And as a result, and the audiences spoke with their wallets and they went back time and again. So we met people who've seen it 3, 4, 5 times. And as a result, IMAX they've now programmed more than 3 times more documentaries than they ever have done in previous years.
Also, any features that want to partner, need an opener, just let me know.
this,
Yeah, but we should be helping each other, shouldn't we? We should be putting films together.
Thank you
and
for writing.
programs.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
well, it's good to end on a positive note when it comes to documentaries, because there's a lot to complain about right now, but I think this is a good way to end it. I want to thank all of our panelists for joining us today. And